I'm going to go back and work on the eyes a little bit again, and I want to get some shadows going on in there. I'm going to switch to my smaller Jillybean Dirty Dancer and use the small round end with extender mixed into the paint colors just a little bit. I'm going to start with the phthalo blue, and I've added just a drop of extender into that. I do want to make sure that I have extender in both ends of my brush as well. So I'm dipping the blender brush side into extender as well, so that'll be ready to blend, but get the extra off on your paper towel. Okay, now this brush does have a nice fine little line, so it makes it easier to get into the small areas. I want to basically get all the area above the pupil filled in with this darker blue. Phthalo blue is a really pretty color. And then I'm just going to taper it down the outside edges a little bit across the bottom, but real narrow across the bottom. So kind of like I'm outlining it. And then flip the brush over and just soften that edge. And I do want to make sure that I keep wiping the extra off. If I go outside of the lines at all, I can actually take a clean brush with just water on it and wipe it off. Turn this a little bit so I can get a better angle for my blending. I want that to be a really nice dark blue on the very outside edge of that iris. So if you need to do another go at it, make sure that gets nice and dark along the outside edges. And you could even actually touch up the edges one more time afterwards with a liner brush if you need to. But I want to make sure that across the very top of the eye does get very dark, because that's where the eyelashes are kind of casting a shadow. So I can actually go right through the black pupil a little bit, because this is a nice transparent color and it's not going to affect the black of the pupil. Same thing on the other eye. Pick up a little bit of the phthalo blue, and it has extender in it. Get it a little bit heavier across the very top of the eye, filling in between the eyelid and the pupil, and then let's taper that along the outside edges, a little bit across the bottom, and flip the brush over and soften. Make sure I'm wiping that extra off on my paper towel in between. And I'm going to turn this around a little bit so I can get a little better angle to blend the other side. Get that nice and blended. Okay, then I see just one more spot here that I think I want a little darker, just along that edge. Okay, and I did get just a little bit on the nose here, so I'm going to take just a clean brush and get that off real quick before it has a chance to dry. I think I put my finger in it. There, that's better. Okay, then inside of the eye, in the whites of the eye, I want to actually have a little bit of a burnt umber shadow. So there again, I'm going to add extender into the paint color itself, just a little drop, loosen it up, kind of like liner brush work. And using the round brush inside the top of the whites of the eyes, I'm going to add a line of burnt umber. Flip the brush over, use a blender brush to soften away that hard edge so that I will have a little shadow on each side of the eye itself. Taper it to the corners or near the tear duct in the outside corner. Soften away that line. Sometimes I'll actually use the shadow color to put across the inside, the top of the eye, if I want the eyes to be a little bit more dramatic. The burnt umber is a little bit more of a natural look, but sometimes it's fun to take a little bit of artistic license and add colors that normally wouldn't be used. Okay, and let's do the other side as well. A little drop of extender into the burnt umber and add a line, taper it towards the corner, flip the brush over, soften that hard edge. Wiping my blender brush off on my paper towel in between to get the extra paint off. And that helps to set the eyes in a little bit better. He was looking pretty surprised there until we get this stage done. Okay. All right, then I want to get a little bit of a highlight in the iris area, so I'm going to take a little droplet of extender and add it into my titanium white and thin that down. It'll be like liner brush consistency. Okay, now for this, I want to get a nice bright highlight under the pupil, kind of like I'm almost making like a crescent shape, hugging the bottom of that pupil. Don't just fill it in all the way to the bottom edge. You still need some of that blue showing on the bottom, and then soften that white highlight so that there's not a hard edge, but it'll help make the eye nice and bright. If the paint starts to dry a little bit and you're having a hard time blending, try adding just a little bit more extender into your blender brush, because the extender will reactivate the color. And then for the next one, you'll know that you'll need to put just a little bit more extender into the paint in order to get that to blend. And I think I still want just a little bit more on here. I want it to be pretty dramatic. Sometimes I can pull out like little teeny lines as well. And if it's easier to switch to a liner brush, you could. So just like little flecks where I've got that highlight. And just make sure that you soften, especially at the very tops. Okay, let's do the same thing to the other side. I'm going to start by just making it a smooth line to begin with. Kind of hugging underneath that pupil, and then soften. Now I'm just barely kind of dabbing, and so what happens is, because of that phthalo blue still being a little wet, I'm getting a nice transition between the white and the blue. And then I'll go back and I'll get little teeny white flecks or lines pulled out from there as well. And soften those top edges. It can also have a white dot, and you could use your stylus, little white dot, but there is one more little highlight in the eye, but I do need to wait till the blue is dry, so I'm just going to leave that alone for now. I'm going to go ahead and outline the eye now with burnt umber using my liner brush. I can just use water because this time I don't really need to blend it. I only put extender into the color if I know I'm going to soften or blend a line. But let's go ahead and let's get a little bit more paint on the brush. Try not to make the line too thick. This is the burnt umber that I'm using. I'm going to go all the way around the perimeter of the eye. I had started out with the shading flesh to outline it first, and the reason I do that is because if I made a mistake, it's easier to camouflage the shading flesh. So I like to go back and reinforce it afterwards with the burnt umber. And I try to get the eyes close to the same, but the fun thing about Santa is he can have a little bit more character. So you can have one eye a little bit smaller than the other, and it just kind of makes him look like he's winking. So you can get away with a lot more imperfections with Santa than you can with like a little girl or a little angel. Okay, outlined all the way around the perimeter. And I can't do the eyelashes until after I've gotten all of the rest of the face done, so I'm going to leave that be for now. I am going to go back one more time with my shading flesh. It's had a chance to dry now, and I want to reinforce that a little bit, and then I'll also add even deeper color. It's a little hard to tell on the camera here, but right now it does look a little bit blotchy, a little bit patchy, and that's because it just needs another coat. I don't put more extender on the surface. I only add it into the color now, because I don't want to add more extender and take a chance of accidentally lifting the paint that's already on there. So I'm going back to the shading flesh, and I'm just going to reinforce the same areas that I already did. Get one more coat, switching back to my larger double-ended brush, making sure that I have extender in both ends, wipe it off on the paper towel. Put a little drop into the shading flesh itself. I'm going to do the bridge of the nose, make sure that I've got a nice solid area in there between the eye and the bridge of the nose. Flip my brush over and just soften where I've stopped. Same thing on the other side. Lay down another coat. Shading flesh. Make sure it tapers into your wrinkle lines. Flip your brush over. Soften away the hard edges. Make sure you also round off the area where it blends into the cheek so that that is a rounded shadow as opposed to a square shadow. And just everywhere that I did the first time, I'm going to do it one more time. And if you want to switch to your smaller blender brush for your wrinkles, you sure can. Whatever makes the job easier for you. Touch that up a little bit more, a little bit on the sides of the nostrils. Taper it to the cheek. And it starts becoming a little bit smoother. I know you want to usually do the opposite. You usually think that you need to take some off if it looks blotchy, but it's usually because it's too transparent and you need another coat. Sides of the forehead. And soften that. Just getting all the wrinkles one more time. And if the area looks good, leave it alone. You don't have to do a second coat if the first one came out okay. Okay, a little bit on the bottom of the nostrils. Now, before I touch up my highlights, I'm going to go ahead and get my cheek color in there next. And then I'll see if I need to touch up the highlights one more time as well. Let's get this corner a little higher up here. If I get that too narrow at the top, it's going to look like the nose is too wide up there. So by pulling the shadow out further away from the eye, it'll soften it. And let's soften this area right here. Add a little bit more of that shading flesh and soften that down in so it's not quite such a hard line in there. Let's do one more time also below the lip here. And that off to the one side. And soften where I stopped. Okay. Okay, medium red rose is the color that I like to use for the cheeks. It's a nice, really pretty kind of corally, pinky color, and it works out great for the cheeks. I'm going to continue doing the same kind of technique, still using my large Dirty Dancer and adding just a little droplet of extender into the color. In fact, I'm going to show you on my palette this time because I do want this to be a little bit thinner. So take a look at, tip that so that you see better in the light. And I have a gray palette paper that I'm working on. I actually get a little bit better color match if I use the gray palette paper when I'm working on a black surface. So very thin, and I've just thinned this with extender so it's real transparent. And I want to put this along the outside edge of the cheek and kind of taper it into a wrinkle or two up there. Come right on down to the mustache, flip my brush over, and soften away that inside edge. And I like to have nice bright cheeks, but it's your Santa. You can make them as bright or as pale as you want them. But in Minnesota, we get nice big red rosy cheeks in the wintertime. It gets cold here. And soften away that edge. And I usually do like to put just a little touch in one or two wrinkles so that it doesn't look like it's quite such a hard stopping point where you started out there. This is also the same color that I use on the lips. and he only has one lip showing because the other one is hidden by his great big mustache. So I want the majority of the color off to the right side, and I'm going to kind of taper it almost like I'm outlining it to the other side. So I'll kind of fill it in on the one side and then taper it. Soften. Get rid of that extra line that's on the, or the hard line that's on the inside of the lip. And this is a nice pretty color. Lots of different colors that you can use for your cheeks. Okay, I also want to use the same color on the bottom of the tip of the nose. I want to give him a little bit more of a rosy nose. Put that across the bottom and soften. Sometimes I put it in the bottom of the nostrils, and sometimes I just do the tip. On this one I'm just going to do the tip, so I'm kind of wiping it out of the nostril area. Get just a little bit brighter. Soften that hard line that's coming into the nose itself. Okay. I think I want just a little bit more yet at the very bottom corners of the cheek, because I am going to come into that cheek down there with some of the beard afterwards, and it'll kind of camouflage where I've stopped. Get a little bit brighter on the bottom of the other cheek as well. And soften. Okay, then I'm going to clean my brushes, both ends of my brush, really well, because I want to go back and do just a little bit more with my highlight again. That was the Highlight Flesh. Just make sure that I touch up all the areas. Just going to add extender into the color itself. Instead of re-wetting the whole surface, I just want to add it into the color. And I want to make sure that I have extender in both ends of my brush. So I want to go back and I want to accent the top of the nostrils, because I kind of lost that highlight when I put my shadows in. And then this way I can also reshape the nostrils, make them nice and rounded. There's lots of different shaped noses, and Santa can have really fun shaped noses because he can have, you know, kind of crooked or bumpy, and it just gives them character. I'm just putting it on all the same areas that I did the first time, just kind of getting one more coat down the center of the nose, and then soften it on each side. This time I'm also going to hit a few of the wrinkles. So I like to just kind of break those up a little bit, and then just softly kind of blend them or fuzz them a little bit so they're not quite such sharp lines. That gives your wrinkles a little bit more dimension. And remember, I've got extender in the color. Same on the other side. So I'm hitting the areas that are probably not quite so much shadow But this is a way of knocking that shadow down a little bit too. And see, I don't have a wrinkle here, but I want to kind of break some of this up. So even if I don't already have a line there, I'm going to add some extras here and there just to break it up. And remember, wrinkles are wrinkly. They're not nice and smooth. It's okay for them to be a little bit blotchy looking. Just lay the color down, and I'm going to also up in the forehead here get some highlight going in between the wrinkles. And just blend that down a little bit. And I may come back and do even more after it's had a chance to dry, and I can kind of take a look at everything all together. I may decide that I need to add a little bit more here and there. It's hard to tell until you get the whole thing done whether or not you need to do any tweaking or adjusting of any of the colors. Just getting a little bit more in the middle of the cheeks again. And it is kind of nice to be blending while everything is wet, because you can kind of blend the colors where they touch each other and you get a nice transition.